The air in the living room doesn't just feel cold, it feels hollow. The velvet-lined box sits open on the coffee table, lighter than it should be. My fingers trace the empty indentations where the pearls should rest, where the sapphire pendant should catch the light, where the heavy gold locket, warm with generations of body heat, used to lie. My breath catches a sharp, painful intake. It's not just missing, it's gone. All of it. The weight of history, the weight of lineage, the weight of my grandmother's hands gifting it to my mother, and my mother's hands placing it in mine, vanished. Silence presses in, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the frantic thumping in my chest. This isn't misplaced. This isn't a momentary lapse in memory. This is an emptiness that screams intent. Where are you watching from? What time is it when this moment finds you? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know to bring these stories to life. Before the hollow box, before the suffocating silence, life was comfortable, predictable even. My husband, Michael, and I had built a life that looked good on paper. A nice house in the suburbs, stable jobs, shared quiet evenings on the sofa. We weren't the couple everyone envied for their fiery passion, but we were the couple others nodded at with approval, solid, dependable. Trust was the unspoken foundation, stronger, I thought, than any argument or disagreement we might have. It was the quiet certainty that held everything together. My inheritance wasn't just money or property. It was this jewelry, a collection passed down through the women in my family. Not overtly flashy, but each piece held a story. The pearls from my great-grandmother's wedding, the sapphire pendant worn by my grandmother at my mother's birth, the locket containing tiny, faded photographs of ancestors I never knew but felt connected to through this gold chain. This wasn't just metal and stones, it was memory, identity, a tangible link to who I was and where I came from. I kept it safe, tucked away in its boxes, rarely worn but always present, a quiet comfort knowing it was there. It represented security, not just financial, but historical. It was my anchor. Michael knew how important it was. He'd seen me handle it with reverence, heard the stories I'd tell about each piece. He understood, or so I believed, that this was untouchable. It was mine, yes, but it was also ours in the sense that it was part of the family we were building, meant to be passed down again someday. It was the antithesis of transactional. It was legacy. The discovery wasn't dramatic at first, just a nagging feeling. I was looking for something else in the back of my closet, where I kept the jewelry boxes. My hand reached for the familiar shape of the large velvet case, and met empty air on the shelf. A small jolt of surprise. Maybe I'd moved it? I checked the other usual spots. Not there. My heart hadn't started pounding yet. Annoyance, more than anything. Where could I have put it? I was meticulous about these things. Then I saw the smaller box, the one with the sapphire pendant. Also gone. A cold knot began to form in my stomach. This wasn't right. I fumbled for the third box, the locket. Empty. That's when the panic clawed its way up my throat. A silent scream that only I could hear. This was a misplacement. This was absence on a scale that felt impossible. 3 distinct boxes, 3 cherished, irreplaceable pieces, all vanished without a trace. Michael was in the other room, reading. The normalcy of his posture, the quiet turn of a page, felt like a grotesque mockery of the chaos exploding inside me. I walked out, the empty boxes clutched in my trembling hands. "Michael," I said, my voice thin and reedy, Have you seen my jewelry? My grandmother's jewelry?" He looked up, a mild, unconcerned expression on his face. "Your jewelry?"
"No. Why?"
"Where would it be?" His casual tone, the slight furrow of his brow that was meant to convey innocent confusion, landed like a physical blow. My hands shook harder. "It's not there," I whispered, holding up the empty boxes. "The pearls, the pendant, the locket, they're gone." He stood up then, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before he masked it. "Gone?
That's
strange. Are you sure? Did you check everywhere?" The careful way he avoided my eyes, the slight shift in his weight, these were tiny cracks in the facade I'd trusted for years. Everywhere, I said, the word heavy with dread. They were right here, in their boxes. He came over, took a box from my hand, peered into it as if its emptiness was a puzzle he genuinely couldn't solve. Well, that's just crazy, he said, shaking his head. Maybe they got stolen? Did someone break in? We both knew that was impossible. No signs of forced entry. Nothing else out of place. Just the systematic disappearance of my most valuable possessions. The conversation spiraled. His questions were vague. His suggestions for searching were half-hearted. He kept insisting it must be somewhere, or maybe I'd lent it to someone and forgotten, or maybe it was a freak accident. Any explanation but the obvious one building like a thundercloud in my mind. I spent the next few days in a daze of disbelief and frantic searching, ripping the house apart, checking places I knew they couldn't possibly be. My rational mind knew it was futile, but the emotional shock demanded action, any action, to fill the void the jewelry had left. Michael remained calmly, maddeningly unhelpful. He'd offer a sympathetic word, a pat on the hand, but there was no real urgency, no shared panic. That's when the first icy tendrils of suspicion really began to snake around my heart. His lack of genuine distress felt
Wrong.
He started working longer hours, taking calls in other rooms. His phone was suddenly password protected when it never had been before. Small things, easily dismissed individually, but together they formed a disturbing pattern. The man I thought I knew, the man I trusted implicitly, was acting like a stranger with a secret. I started checking bank statements, something I hadn't done closely in years. Joint accounts, ours were. Everything seemed normal at first glance, until I noticed larger-than-usual cash withdrawals. Nothing huge, but enough to raise a question mark. He brushed it off when I asked, something about work expenses, needing cash for a supplier who preferred it. More small lies building a wall between us. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic moment, but a slow, sickening realization that bloomed from the soil of his evasions and my mounting dread. It was the look in his eyes when I pressed him too hard, a flash of something cold and calculating that vanished as quickly as it appeared. It was the way he avoided mentioning the jewelry altogether, acting as if the subject had been closed. It was the dawning certainty that he wasn't confused, he wasn't searching, he knew exactly where my jewelry was because he had put it there. Or, more accurately, put it gone. The thought solidified into a crushing weight. He had sold it. My inheritance. The anchor of my identity. The legacy meant for future generations. He had turned it into anonymous cash. The betrayal wasn't just about the money, though that was significant. It was about the violation of trust so fundamental, so deeply ingrained, it felt like he had reached inside my chest and ripped out something vital. He hadn't just stolen from me. He had stolen me. He had commodified my history, my family, my love, and sold it off piece by piece. When I finally confronted him with the accusation, the calm facade finally cracked, but not in the way I expected. There was no heartfelt confession, no immediate collapse into remorse. Instead, anger. Defensive, explosive anger. "How could you even think that?" he roared, his face twisted with feigned outrage. "After everything? You think I would steal from you? My own wife." He threw accusations back at me. I was paranoid, ungrateful, didn't trust him. He spun a web of gaslighting so thick, so convincing in its fury, that for a terrifying moment, I almost doubted myself. Had I gone crazy? Was I imagining things? But the emptiness of the boxes was real. The missing items were real. And the cold calculation I'd glimpsed in his eyes was real. I held onto those realities like a lifeline in a storm of his manufactured rage. He finally admitted it, not with remorse, but with a chilling lack of empathy. Cornered by my questions about the large cash withdrawals and his sudden secretive behavior, he finally broke. "Okay, fine," he yelled, throwing his hands up. "Yeah, I sold some of it. We needed the money." Needed the money? Our finances were tight sometimes, like any couples, but we weren't starving. We weren't facing foreclosure. This wasn't a desperate act born of necessity. It was a choice. A unilateral decision to liquidate my history for his perceived needs, without a word of consultation, without a shred of respect for what it meant to me. He tried to minimize it. It was just old stuff. You never even wore it. It was just sitting there. Just old stuff. He reduced generations of legacy, of love and memory, to old stuff. The casual cruelty of that phrase cut deeper than any lie. He didn't see the stories, the hands that had worn them, the tears and joys they had witnessed. He saw only dormant capital. He hadn't sold it all at once. He'd done it piecemeal, he admitted, to avoid suspicion. The pearls first, then the pendant, the locket most recently. He wouldn't tell me who he'd sold them to. Private buyers, he said vaguely. Through a contact, he acted as if this confession should be the end of it. He'd admitted it. Wasn't that enough? We'd just move on, forget about it. He'd make it up to me someday, he promised, a hollow offer that felt like another lie. This was the deepening crisis. The initial shock gave way to a cold, persistent ache. The man I shared my life with was capable of this. He could look me in the eye, lie, manipulate, and dismiss something so sacred to me as old stuff. The trust wasn't just damaged, it was annihilated. It wasn't just about the jewelry anymore, it was about the stranger living in my house. He was defiant now. He'd sold them, the money was spent, too bad. Get over it. His attitude was a second layer of betrayal, proving the first hadn't been a moment of weakness, but a reflection of his character. He saw my pain, my devastation, and offered only impatience and justification. I felt adrift. How do you recover something sold into anonymity? How do you put a price on memory? How do you mend a trust shattered into a million irreparable pieces? The jewelry was gone, and with it, so was the future I thought I had, the legacy I thought I would pass on. Everything felt lost. The house felt cold, filled with his presence, but devoid of warmth. Every object, every shared space, felt tainted by his deceit. But beneath the devastation, a spark ignited. Small, at first, barely perceptible. It was the realization that he had decided my worth, he had dictated the value of my history. And I would not let him have the final say. He thought he had won, clearing out my past for his convenience. He thought I would grieve and eventually accept it. He was wrong. The midpoint shift arrived quietly, in the dead of night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every lie, every evasion, every dismissive word. The raw pain was still there, a physical weight on my chest, but something else was stirring. A cold, hard resolve. I stopped crying. I stopped asking why he would do this. The question shifted from understanding him to reclaiming what was mine. He thought he was smart. Selling privately, no paper trail, scattering the pieces like dust in the wind. But the legal system, I suddenly realized, wasn't just about criminal acts or civil disputes between strangers. It was about property. It was about ownership. And that jewelry was unequivocally mine. It was inherited property, separate from marital assets in crucial ways. He had no legal right to sell it without my consent. The game changed in that silent, dark room. This wasn't just an emotional battle anymore. This was a strategic war. He had used deceit as his weapon. I would use the law as mine. My pain didn't dissipate, but it transformed. It became fuel. It became the cold, unwavering determination to not only get back what was mine, but to utterly dismantle the smug certainty he wore like armor. I found a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one specializing in property law and, crucially, with a reputation for being relentless. I sat in her office, a sterile room that felt a million miles away from the emotional wreckage of my life, and laid out the facts, the dates, the missing items, his reluctant confession. She listened, sharp and focused, asking precise questions. When I finished, she leaned forward. He had no right to sell your inherited property without your explicit consent, she stated calmly.
None.
Regardless of whether he's your husband. This isn't community property he liquidated. It's yours. And the people who bought it, knowingly or unknowingly, are now in possession of stolen goods, legally speaking. Stolen goods. The phrase resonated deep within me. It wasn't too strong. He had stolen from me. And now, the law saw it that way too. This was the turning point. The lawyer outlined the strategy. It wouldn't be easy. We had to find the buyers. We'd need to prove he sold them, the specific pieces. But, she explained, if we could identify the buyers and prove the provenance of the jewelry, we could file injunctions. Court orders demanding the immediate return of the property to its rightful owner, me. It felt audacious.
Impossible.
Like trying to gather scattered leaves in a hurricane. But the lawyer's quiet confidence was infectious. This wasn't about punishment, she explained, at least not directly through this civil action. This was about recovery, about forcing the physical return of the objects he had taken. The cost would be significant. Legal fees would mount quickly. It would be an emotional and logistical nightmare. My marriage was already over, but pursuing this would guarantee a scorched earth outcome. There would be no quiet separation, no amicable parting. This would be a public, painful dismantling. Did I want to do it? Did I want to plunge into a legal battle that would consume my life, drain my resources, and force me to confront his betrayal in the most public and unforgiving arena? The image of his dismissive face, calling my history old stuff, flashed in my mind. The emptiness of those velvet boxes. The cold violation of my trust.
Yes.
I wanted to do it. More than anything. This wasn't just about jewelry anymore. This was about justice. About reclaiming not just the physical objects, but the sense of self he had tried to strip away. He thought he held all the power because he had the cash and the items were gone. He was about to learn the power of a woman scorned, armed with the law. My pain hardened into purpose. The legal process felt like navigating a labyrinth in the dark. First, filing the initial police report, which felt strangely anticlimactic after the emotional earthquake I'd endured. The police were polite, recorded the details, but explained that recovering items sold to unknown third parties was incredibly difficult. It felt like hitting a dead end with the traditional routes. But my lawyer wasn't relying on traditional police work. We needed information. Michael refused to give us names of the buyers. He stonewalled completely, probably advised by his own lawyer once he realized I wasn't just going to cry about it. But my lawyer was relentless. Subpoenas were issued. His bank records were scrutinized more deeply, tracking where the large cash withdrawals might have ended up or what communications might correlate. Emails, text messages, phone records, anything that could provide a lead. It felt invasive, cold, clinical, but necessary. Each legal document filed felt like another brick in a wall I was building around his deceit. The emotional toll was immense. Living in the same house felt unbearable, a constant reminder of the lie. We spoke only through lawyers or in clipped, hostile sentences about logistics. The man I had loved became an adversary, cold and calculating, determined to protect himself and the money he had made, still refusing to acknowledge the depth of the wound he had inflicted. He seemed genuinely baffled by my refusal to just let it go. Friends and family were bewildered. Some offered sympathy, others cautioned against the legal path, fearing it would destroy me financially and emotionally. There were moments of despair, late nights staring at the ceiling again, wondering if I was pouring good money and precious emotional energy after an impossible cause. The legal fees were stacking up, a constant, heavy reminder of the price of his betrayal and the price of fighting it. Finding the buyers was the biggest hurdle. Michael had been careful. But careful wasn't careful enough against a determined legal team armed with court orders. We traced transactions, communications. A name emerged from a subpoenaed record, a buyer of antique jewelry who had corresponded with Michael around the time the pearls went missing. It was a thread, thin and easily broken, but it was a start. From that first buyer, cautiously approached by my lawyer's investigators, we found another connection, and then another. It turned out Michael hadn't used one single contact. He'd sold pieces to different dealers or collectors over time. Each lead was followed, each transaction verified, each piece identified. It was painstaking, slow work. It required expert verification of the jewelry, confirming they were indeed the pieces described in my grandmother's and mother's wills, the ones pictured in old family photos we provided. The provenance was undeniable. The shock and dismay of the buyers was, at times, almost pitiable. They had purchased the jewelry in good faith, or so they claimed, from a man who presented himself as the rightful owner. Now, they were being told they were in possession of property that had been, in essence, stolen. My lawyer explained their legal position clearly. They could pursue Michael for damages, but the jewelry itself belonged to me. This was the heart of the injunction strategy. We weren't suing the buyers for money. We were petitioning the court to order them to return the specific physical items to me. It was a property recovery action, pure and simple. The day of the court hearing arrived. It wasn't a dramatic trial with witness stands and cross-examinations of Michael that might come later in divorce proceedings. This was a hearing focused solely on the injunctions against the identified buyers. My lawyer presented the evidence, the proof of my inheritance, the dates of the sales according to Michael's records, the identification of the items, the legal principle that misappropriated property could be recovered from third parties regardless of their intent if the original owner proved their right. I sat there listening, feeling oddly detached. The sterile courtroom, the legal jargon, it all felt separate from the raw, messy pain that had driven me here. Yet it was the instrument of my fight. Each word spoken by my lawyer was a blow struck against the wall of Michael's deceit. Michael was there, too, required to attend. He sat on the other side of the room with his lawyer, his face a mask of controlled annoyance and apprehension. He still seemed to believe this was some sort of elaborate bluff, that the court would never actually force people to return expensive items they had paid for. He underestimated the cold, unwavering logic of property law and the determination fueled by a betrayed heart. The judge listened patiently. He reviewed the evidence. My lawyer argued eloquently, grounding the complex legal arguments in the simple, undeniable truth. The jewelry was hers. It was taken without her consent, and she is entitled to its return. Then, the judge delivered his ruling. His voice was calm, authoritative. He stated the facts as presented. He cited the relevant case law. And then he issued the order. Injunctions granted. The specific buyers identified were ordered by the court to return the jewelry to me immediately. Not eventually. Not with compensation from Michael first. Immediately. The judge's words cut through the tension in the courtroom. The buyer's lawyers, present virtually or in person, exchanged stunned glances. Michael's face, that was the moment. His jaw went slack. The mask of controlled annoyance shattered, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. He hadn't seen it coming. Not like this. He had gambled that the jewelry was gone forever, scattered and untraceable, a fait accompli I would eventually have to accept. He had believed the practical impossibility of recovering it would be my undoing. He was blindsided by the clean, brutal efficiency of the legal system when wielded precisely. This wasn't about proving he was a bad person, though he was. It was about proving I owned the jewelry and the current holders did not have a superior claim to it. And the judge agreed. The law didn't care about Michael's excuses, his need for money, or the buyer's good faith. It cared about rightful ownership. My lawyer squeezed my arm gently. It was over. The main part of the fight, the recovery, was won. I looked at Michael across the room. The fight had drained me, hollowed me out in ways I was still only beginning to understand. But seeing the look on his face, the dawning horror as he comprehended the magnitude of his loss, the loss of the money he'd gained, the public humiliation, the undeniable proof that I had not only fought back but had won decisively using a method he hadn't anticipated, there was a cold, hard shard of satisfaction that pierced through the exhaustion. He hadn't just lost the money. He had lost his control over the situation entirely. He had lost the narrative. He had lost the smug certainty that he could do this to me and get away with it because the items were physically gone. I hadn't just wished for karma. I had hired a legal sharpshooter and sent her after him. The process of retrieving the jewelry was surreal. My lawyer's office handled the logistics, coordinating with the buyers or their representatives. One by one, the pieces started to come back. The pearls arrived first, shipped in a secure box from a collector in another state. Opening the case felt like unearthing something precious and long buried. They were cool to the touch, luminescent, perfect. Holding them, the weight felt familiar, comforting. But the comfort was laced with a bitter edge. They were back, but the hands that had given them to me were gone forever, and the man who had tried to erase their history stood between me and them now, a toxic shadow. Next came the sapphire pendant. It glinted under the office lights as my lawyer took it out of its wrapping. That deep, intense blue, like a concentrated piece of the midnight sky. I remembered my mother wearing it, the way it caught the light as she moved. Now, it felt heavier, burdened by the journey it had taken through deception and legal battles. Finally, the locket, the heaviest piece, in weight and in history. The gold felt warm again, even after being away. I opened it, my fingers tracing the tiny, faded faces inside. My ancestors looked back at me, silent witnesses to the turmoil their legacy had endured. Holding it, I didn't feel a rush of joy, but a profound, quiet sense of rightness. It was back where it belonged. It was home. The victory wasn't triumphant.
It was
Clinical. Satisfying in a cold, intellectual way, proving that my determination, my legal strategy, had worked flawlessly. But emotionally, I felt spent. The jewelry was physically present again, but the innocence, the trust, the undamaged history it represented, that was gone forever. Michael's reaction to the jewelry being returned was the final, unexpected twist I hadn't fully prepared for. When he learned the injunctions had been granted, he raged. He threatened. But as the pieces actually started arriving at my lawyer's office, the reality of his situation hit him with full force. The money was gone, spent. He had nothing to show for his betrayal but legal bills and the undeniable proof of what he had done, now a matter of court record. He called me, something he hadn't done outside of hostile, logistics-based conversations in months. His voice wasn't angry this time. It was broken. He cried. Said he was sorry, truly sorry for everything. He hadn't understood, he sobbed, what it really meant, what he had done. He sounded like a child who had finally realized the irreversible consequences of a selfish act. His tears didn't move me the way they once might have. They felt too late, too self-pitying. He wasn't crying for the trust he'd shattered, the history he'd desecrated, the pain he'd inflicted. He was crying for himself, for the mess he was in, for the money he'd lost, for the consequences he was facing. It was the sound of a man who had finally lost his bet and couldn't stand the cost. I listened, my own voice quiet and steady. You didn't understand? I asked, the question hanging in the air between us. I told you what it meant. I showed you. You just didn't care until you got caught. There was nothing left to say. His tears were meaningless to me now. The man crying on the other end of the phone was the same man who had coolly calculated how to turn my heritage into cash, who had lied to my face, who had dismissed my feelings. His remorse wasn't a revelation. It was a reaction to getting caught and losing. The marriage ended, of course. There was no coming back from this. The legal fight over the jewelry was separate from the divorce, but it sealed our fate. The court's order stood as an undeniable testament to his betrayal and my fight for what was mine. The jewelry sits in my safe now, back in its velvet boxes. I take it out sometimes, holding the cool weight of the pearls, tracing the deep blue of the sapphire, opening the locket to look at the faded faces. They are beautiful, precious mine. But they carry the scars of their journey. They are a reminder of love, family, and history, yes, but also of betrayal, pain, and the cold, hard price of fighting for what is rightfully yours. The victory feels less like happiness and more like equilibrium restored, albeit at immense cost. The scales of justice tilted back into place, not gently, but with a jarring clatter. He thought he could take what was mine and get away with it. He learned that some things, some histories cannot be bought and sold so easily. And some women, pushed too far, will not just break, but will find the strength in their brokenness to fight back, cold and relentless, until what was lost is found, and justice, in its own quiet, unforgiving way, is served. The quiet certainty of trust is gone, replaced by a colder, harder certainty, the knowledge that I can stand up for myself, even against the person I loved most, and win. The jewelry is back, a silent, gleaming testament to that fight. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe. It helps bring more of these stories to life.